Hey everybody, this is GGV, and I'd like to start out this episode by giving special props to Duke and Baylor. It's impressive. Winning as a top 10 team. I didn't think you'd get to see two top 10 teams win today, but apparently, I think we thought we'd see more. Because you'd expect top 10 teams to win basketball games. And I'm not upset. I love upsets. But, you should win basketball games, top 10 teams. You're looking at it. Not only did the top 6 teams in the NCAA top 25 lose, right? 1 Gonzaga, 2 Arizona, 3 Auburn, 4 Purdue, 5 Kansas, and 6 Kentucky. Not to mention, number 9 Texas Tech also lost today. It's pretty impressive that you can win basketball games. Duke and Baylor. I'll give props to Baylor. Baylor beat a very tough team in Kansas. They went on the road. Actually, they had them at home. I'm sorry, they had them at home, but they won a very tough basketball game. They're 3.5-point underdogs. Baylor's not used to being underdogs, and they performed very well. But let's go over how it affected, because honestly, a lot of conferences were affected by these upsets because there were a lot of them. But let's start off with pretty massive one in the Big Ten. Number 4 Purdue is upset by Michigan State. And this makes the Big Ten a lot more interesting. You could not be more happy if you are a Wisconsin fan. Wisconsin fans have got to be thanking their lucky stars. Because talk about one of the best things that could have ever happened to them. One of the best things that could have happened to them was Purdue losing. Purdue lost to Michigan State. I don't understand why it's being all glitchy, but let's go to ESPN. They're going to have the most up-to-date things. Let's look at the standings. Wisconsin's won now. That's the big takeaway in the Big Ten. That's a big thing for Purdue. Now, to be fair, Purdue still holds their destiny in their hands. This is still very much a conference Purdue can win. They can. They can very much win this thing. It's not over. It's definitely not over. I wouldn't even be saying it was over if I'm Purdue. It's still very much a possibility that Purdue wins this thing. But Wisconsin, if Wisconsin keeps playing the way they're playing, I find it very difficult that Purdue can beat them. I find it very difficult any team can beat Wisconsin the way they're playing. I mean, Wisconsin's playing at an elite level right now. And when I say elite, I don't mean pretty good. I mean, it'd be tough to see any team beating Wisconsin the way they're playing right now. Wisconsin now sits at the top of the Big Ten at 14-4 in conference. Purdue loses this game. They sit at 13-5, and if you're looking at it, this is an excellent opportunity for Illinois. I'll talk about Illinois a little bit later on today, but excellent opportunity for Wisconsin to get a big win. This is a chance for a huge win. I mean, winning the Big Ten is important. It is so huge coming down the stretch. Michigan State, on the other hand, also picks up a hugely significant win. Michigan State now sits as the 6th seed. The only reason is because Iowa has the tiebreaker. I'd be interested if you're Michigan State. You want to get the 5 seed, obviously. 6 seed's not a bad spot to be, though. You draw either Maryland or Minnesota. I don't know if I'd want that game, though, because Maryland has obviously... It gave them a tough time. Last time Maryland played Michigan State, they gave them a tough basketball game, hard fought, but they came out in the end where they win. So, I mean, this is a really interesting thing going down the stretch. Who's going to get the 5 seed? Who can get the 4 seed? Maybe if Ohio State crumbles down the stretch, Michigan State gets it. But this is a huge win for Michigan State. Michigan State was a team that was crumbling down the stretch. You finally get a huge win against Purdue, a really good Purdue team. After that, we had 2 SEC upsets, guys. We had 2 huge SEC upsets. Not only did Arkansas upset Kentucky, but Tennessee also upset Auburn. And while they're not technical upsets, you're looking at a very, very interesting SEC now, because while Auburn's lost, they're still one game ahead of everyone. Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee now all sit at 12-4. And Arkansas is the 2 seed. And I don't know if I could have expected that a couple months ago. A couple months back, I did not see Kentucky. I mean, Arkansas is the second best team in the SEC, but right now they're playing like the second best team in the SEC. They are playing some elite basketball, and Tennessee also gets a huge win. And if I'm Tennessee, I'm a little bit torn about Arkansas beating Kentucky because you could have passed Arkansas if Arkansas was to lose that game. But now you're just still in fourth place. You're looking at it, if you're a Volunteer fan, you could make a run at this thing and win the SEC, which is so huge. If you're a Volunteers fan, Volunteers are getting hot, obviously, down the stretch. They're playing really good basketball right now. They just beat Auburn. I mean, this is really a 4-team race in the SEC, and I'm really kind of fascinated to see how it turns out. It's going to be really interesting, guys. Moving down the list, Big 12 time. Time to talk about the Big 12, because we had 2 significant upsets in it. Baylor upsets Kansas. I think the more significant one, maybe it's just me, is Texas Tech is upset by TCU. This puts TCU in an excellent position, by the way. Could not be a better outcome for TCU. Honestly, if you lose this game, Iowa State passes you. And I understand, I was saying this before, Iowa State passes you. That's not a good spot to be if you're in the Big 12. Right now, I don't see you passing Texas, TCU. But the Horned Frogs are a team that just picked up a top 10 win. This is I'm going to say this is a tournament basketball team. You're looking at the Big 12. There are 6 teams, in my opinion, that are for sure going to the tournament, and TCU was one of them. And TCU obviously gets a big win over Texas Tech, and if you're a Texas fan, you could not be happier about this fact. Because despite Texas Tech sweeping you, you're still only 1 game back from them, which is really helpful. You're looking at Texas Tech's schedule down the stretch. Texas Tech finishes the season off with Kansas State and Oklahoma State. That's not the hardest schedule. Texas finishes the season with Baylor and Kansas. So that's unfortunate. If you're a Texas fan, you would like that not to be your ending, because that is literally the toughest ending I've seen to a season of all the teams I've looked at so far. Playing Baylor and Kansas back-to-back is going to be rough for Texas, especially you get Kansas on the road, which is going to be horrible. But let's move past. I mean, like, Texas Tech is obviously within grasp of Texas, and obviously Texas Tech has the tiebreaker. So if you're Texas, you really need Texas Tech to lose to Kansas State and Oklahoma State, which is probably unlikely, but you never know. You've put yourself in a position to maybe get the 3 seed and maybe even get the 2 seed if Baylor also crumbles down the stretch. And if you're looking at it from a Baylor fan perspective, they're only half a game back atop the Big 12 now. Now, Kansas doesn't have the hardest schedule down the stretch outside of the Texas game. Baylor doesn't have the easiest one, having to play Iowa State as their last game. But, I say Kansas doesn't have the hardest schedule down the stretch. I'm talking about they play TCU twice. They have a home-and-home series with TCU coming up. And it's going to be interesting. It really is going to be fascinating to see if TCU could really help out Baylor. Because remember, Baylor's played 1 more game than Kansas. So who knows? If Baylor wins out, Kansas is upset once, whether it's by TCU or Texas. This could get really interesting down the stretch. It could go down to a tiebreaker, which I don't know who would fall that way, because number one, they probably have the same overall record. If Kansas goes 2-1 down the stretch and Baylor goes 2-0 down the stretch, they both have actually, Baylor would win that head-to-head. So Baylor wins out. You're just hoping for Kansas upset one time and you can pass Kansas. Finally, actually not finally, I'm sorry. We still got to touch on the Pac-12. Because Arizona was not only upset by Colorado, they were owned by Colorado. And that doesn't change. I mean, remember, if Arizona had won this basketball game and Oregon had upset USC, which didn't turn out to happen, but it was very close to happening, Arizona would have top seed in the Pac-12 locked up. They do not. They no longer have that. Now, Arizona can still lose the Pac-12. Don't get me wrong, but it's unlikely, right? They play USC. They play USC on 3-1. That's going to be March 1st, which is Tuesday. So they play USC on Tuesday. That's obviously going to be a hugely important game. But even if USC wins that game, they're still a half game back in conference, and that means all Arizona has to do is win both Stanford and Cal. That shouldn't be the hardest thing to do in the world, but at least gives USC a chance here. And Colorado picks up a much-needed win. This is a tournament. This is a number 1 overall seed, Arizona. And this is coming off a rough last outing for Colorado. They lose to Arizona State. This isn't the best Arizona State team. Colorado is in a position where if you lose this game, you drop behind Washington. So it was going to be a rough road. It was going to be tough for Colorado to make it, but then you get this victory, right? This is a number 1 overall seed, likely team, and the Wildcats, you upset them. And this is huge for Colorado. They're only half a game behind Oregon now. This weekend could not have gone better, by the way, if you're Oregon. I mean, if you're Colorado, if you're Oregon, it probably couldn't have gone worse. UCLA won, you lose, and Colorado gets closer to you. Could not have gone worse for Oregon, but Colorado picks a hugely significant win in the Pac-12, and this reaffirms my belief that I think there's 5 tournament teams in the Pac-12. I legitimately do believe that. But on to the last one, and this is probably the most embarrassing of all of them. Gonzaga, they were only 9.5-point favorites, but they lose a game in the WCC, and this probably just proves that St. Mary's, it really is a solid basketball team. It really is a good basketball team, guys. Gonzaga is a really good basketball team. Obviously, the Gales get a big win. I think this is, obviously, St. Mary's is going to be a tournament team. I don't see the argument against that anymore. St. Mary's doesn't, remember, Gonzaga already has this thing locked up. The West Coast Conference schedule is done, where the tournament starts next week. So that's going to be interesting watching down the stretch. Obviously, San Francisco is going to have to make a run in the tournament, right? And so is Santa Clara and BYU if they want to have any chance. Obviously, teams at the bottom likely are out anyways, but they can definitely make a run in the West Coast Conference. You never know. But you're talking about teams that just need wins to make the tournament. And I think San Francisco, BYU, and Santa Clara are some of them. And if you could pick up a win over St. Mary's or Gonzaga in the tournament, that could definitely boost your chances of making it at large if you're a Dons fan or if a Broncos fan or a Cougars fan. Anyways, that's what happened yesterday. That was some madness. It shouldn't have taken that long, but, was some madness. We have 4 basketball games tomorrow. 1 in the Big East, 1 in the American, and 2 in the Big Ten. We'll start off with the Big East one at 11 o'clock. We have number 21 UConn, which sits at 20-7, traveling to they travel to Georgetown, which is at 6-21. UConn favored by 11 points on CBS. UConn sits in a very important spot. UConn sits at 13-2 in conference. UConn was actually helped out by Providence yesterday, with Providence beating Creighton, giving UConn a little bit more wiggle room. I'm sorry, not 13-2. I'm going to have to go back to this. I'm sorry, guys. I normally use Google's thing to determine standings, but we're going to have to go back to ESPN because it's on the fritz. But UConn sits at 11-5 in conference. Creighton, with that loss, fell to 11-6 in conference. UConn's 3 games back in the Big East. I find it unlikely, to say the very least, that UConn wins the Big East. It seems like a very unlikely scenario, but UConn got a big win over Villanova this week. This is interesting. So UConn with a win moves to 12-5. A game ahead of Creighton. Basically, right now, UConn's playing for the 3 seed. It's very important to hold on to that if you're the Huskies. And the Huskies they play Creighton. They play Creighton on Wednesday. So if I am UConn, I'd love some wiggle room there. I'd love for that game not to determine who's going to be in third place. Remember, UConn has the tiebreaker over Creighton, not by much though. If you lose this basketball game, you sit at 20-8. They sit at 19-9. You're only 1 game better overall, but still, that's what the tiebreaker would come down to, and you would win that. But if you lose one of the games to Georgetown or DePaul, that game against Creighton will determine who's the number 3 spot, unless Creighton loses down the stretch, which I don't know what Creighton's schedule looks like. Creighton plays Seton Hall as their last game. Seton Hall is not a horrible basketball team, likely not a tournament team if you're looking at it. But 18-9 might not be the worst record who could make it the tournament. Big East is interesting because obviously Providence, Villanova, and UConn are probably locks, but Creighton, Marquette, and Seton Hall and Xavier are all kind of duking it out to be one of those other teams that make it to the Big East tournament. And St. John's is kind of overlooked, probably because they're not going to make it at large, but 7-9 is not the worst record to have in conference. But UConn with a loss falls to 11-6 and would enter the tiebreaker with Creighton. Now they win that tiebreaker, but that game against Creighton would then become huge. Georgetown would just like a win. They can't pass anyone. They can't pass DePaul. I think it's legitimately impossible now. There's only 2 or 3 games left. Even if it's 3 games left, you can't pass DePaul. But anyways, that's where we have in the Big East. At 11:30, we have SMU, which is at 20-6. Travel number 14, Houston, which is at 23-4. Houston favored 11 points on ESPN. And this is a big game. This is a huge game, not only for Houston, but for SMU. SMU is a team on the bubble right now, and I believe on the right side of the bubble. They sit at 20-6 overall. They have a big win over Houston. They don't have horrible losses on their resume. But on the other hand, they have a win over Memphis, which is a pretty significant win if you're SMU. This would be it. This is a huge opportunity for SMU to get there, right? SMU, with this win, I think is a lock to make the tournament. And Houston down the stretch doesn't have the hardest schedule, although outside, I would say they have a tough schedule, right? They still have to play SMU and Memphis on the road. This is a tough schedule. This is a tough, those 2 games are tough. Cincy and Temple aren't the toughest teams to draw. Cincinnati obviously set at 7-9 in conference, 17-12 overall. Temple sits at 8-6 in conference, 15-10 overall. And that's pretty good, but still, I think there's only 3 really tournament teams in the American, and Tulane, Temple, and UCF and Cincinnati. They're all teams that look fine on paper, but just are not going to pose a threat to Houston. SMU is a team that is obviously proven to pose a threat to Houston. If they win this game, they sweep SMU. I don't know if that could possibly change it. But if you're looking at it from an SMU point, you would definitely put yourself in a position to possibly win the number 1 overall seed, which is really important if you're a Mustangs fan. You could even win the American and make sure you make the tournament. Anyways, that's what's going on in the American. At 1 o'clock, we have number 15, Illinois, which is at 19-8. Traveling to Michigan, which is at 15-11. This is an even game on CBS. And at 3 o'clock, we have number 22, Ohio State, which is at 18-7. Traveling to Maryland, which is at 13-15. Ohio State favored by 4 points on CBS. So we'll start with the Illinois-Michigan game. Illinois with a win obviously also moves to 13-5 overall. Only 1 game back in the Big Ten standings for the number 1 overall seed. So pretty huge game going on between Illinois and Michigan, right? Illinois with a win can move to 13-5 and would not have the tiebreaker over Purdue, but at least they would put yourselves in a position. Wisconsin and Purdue play each other, so one of them will get knocked off. If you win out Illinois, you at the very least get the 2 seed, which would be so nice if you're a Fighting Illini fan. But you're also looking at it from an Illinois standpoint. This could go very badly for you very quickly. If Illinois loses this game to Michigan and Ohio State wins their game against Maryland, Ohio State moves to 12-5. You fall to 12-6. You're suddenly in the 4 spot. 4 spot's a bad spot to be. Because 4 spot plays Iowa. That's not good. 2 seed plays Michigan or Rutgers. I'd rather play Michigan or Rutgers than Iowa. Iowa's one of the hottest teams in the Big Ten right now. Don't want to play them. On the other hand, if Ohio State loses this game, you fall to 11-6 in your Ohio State. That's bad. That is a bad spot to be because Iowa's then only 1 game back. Now, I believe you likely have the tiebreaker there. You're 1 game better. I don't know. It's tough, but you'd be 1 game better in conference. I don't know if you had the tiebreaker if you're the Buckeyes fan. This is a hard one if you're an Ohio State fan. Michigan, if they win this basketball game, moves to 10-7 and back into the Iowa-Michigan race for that 5 seed. And Michigan, despite starting off the season not very well, not having a very good overall record, would be very much in the race for the 5 seed, which is important because the 5 seed likely plays Maryland or Minnesota instead of having to play likely Northwestern. Big difference, especially if Minnesota somehow pulls off that upset. If Maryland wins the game against Ohio State, they can move to 6-12 and into a tie with Northwestern. Don't know who would win it because they'd have a 14-15 record over Northwestern by the 13-14. I believe more games wins. I think Maryland would have the better win percentage. So they would actually, I think, move to the 11 seed, which is important, and you'd be closing in on at least Penn State only being 1 game back in the win column, and depending on how the Penn State-Nebraska game turns out, possibly, well, it could be worse, actually. It could be 1 game overall back, or it could be 2 games overall back, and that's likely a nail in the coffin if you're a Maryland fan. But Michigan, I forgot to go over Maryland with a loss, also could falls to 5-13. And Minnesota with a loss would move to 5-13. It would go to tiebreaker. Maryland and Minnesota would have that tiebreaker. So if you're Maryland, you could fall behind Minnesota. Not a big deal because you're going to be playing them anyways. Big deal is overtaking Northwestern. Michigan with a loss could fall to 9-8 and would drop below Rutgers. Rutgers would then move into the 7 seed. 7 seed's important because you would be playing Penn State instead of Indiana. In my opinion, I'd much rather play Penn State than Indiana because Indiana, while they're cold right now, has the ability to get very good. Obviously, they've beaten Purdue this year. I'd much rather be playing. So if you're a Rutgers fan, big Illinois fan tonight. If you're an Ohio State fan, big Michigan fan. If you're an Illinois fan, big Maryland fan. If you're a Minnesota fan, big Ohio State fan. If you're a Northwestern fan, big Ohio State fan. Basically, that's how that breaks it down. That's time for my pick. I'm sorry this episode's running long, guys, by the way. I'm done anyways. I might as well pick an upset I think I would really enjoy seeing. I think the Mustangs has what it takes to upset Houston. Everybody, this is GG saying adios amigos and go Mustangs.